In a week where the debate around asylum seekers and immigration has intensified, opposition parties have been rounding on the Tánaiste in particular, accusing him of unhelpful language in comments that he made last week. So let's remind ourselves of what Simon Harris had to say.
Our migration numbers are too high, and the system is not built to deal with such large numbers. Immigration is a good thing in Ireland. We benefit from immigration. Look at our health service, look at so many parts of our economy. All of that is good, and there are many legal pathways for migration, work permits and the likes, and of course we have international obligations. But our migration numbers are too high. One of the reasons they're so high is that there are too many people who come to this country and who are told they do not have a right to be here, and it is taking too long for them to be removed from the country. I welcome the work that the Minister for Justice has started around deportation flights, around improving processing time, but I think we have to be honest. I think we have to listen to the people of this country who have said, who I believe are saying to us, look, we used to live in a country where around 3,000 people sought international protection each year. That number has gone to in and around 20,000, sometimes a little above it, sometimes a little below it. That is a very, very significant increase, and it is too high.
Simon Harris speaking before the Cabinet meeting, not 2 days ago, but rather 9 days ago, but comments which have then kick-started something of a national debate, including, I think it's probably fair to say, Richard, a debate about the debate. Because there might be some people who will have heard some of what Simon Harris had to say there and think that that's all perfectly reasonable and that it's fine to have a national debate. But part of the issue here is the timing of what he said.
Yeah, I think you can't remove... Context is everything in this. And look, there's a couple of things in this. The Tánaiste said multiple times, including today, that people are trying to shut down the debate on immigration. He's the Tánaiste of this country. He can, at the drop of a hat, ring up any national broadcaster, national station, say, I want to come on and talk about the immigration issue. And nobody's going to turn him down for that. Mm-hmm. Nobody. How can you can't use the playbook of I'm being oppressed and I can't have this debate if you are the second in command of the country. So that's the first thing I want to say on that point. Second thing is sensitivity and the context of it is very, very important. In the aftermath of what Simon Harris said, though there is no causal link, and everybody in the opposition has said this, there was obviously the suspected arson attack in Drogheda. Now 2 people have been arrested as of the time of recording of this. That matter is being investigated by the Gardaí. But opposition figures even before then were saying that, look, this sort of commentary comes at a time when there is a huge, huge concern for people who are in international protection centres. There is concern about racism in this country, as actually some very, very important work by the Dublin Inquirer newspaper said about city centre safety that showed that people who are not white are far, far overrepresented as victims of crime in Dublin city centre. That is interesting in the context of this as well. So Simon Harris coming out here and making broad brushstroke statements, conflating absolutely every type of immigration. Talking in particular then about people who he says do not have a right to be here and who are overstaying their welcome effectively. The people who have applied for international protection have been refused and just haven't left. Yeah. Now that is a small number of people in the context of the national immigration
Yeah, because last year's net immigration was something in the region of about 90,000. There would have been about... How many people who would have been issued with deportation orders that weren't given effect to? About
2,403 deportation orders were signed in 2024. Of these, 1,116 departed the state, mostly voluntarily. And
so
then there's
12 or 1,300 people who did not give effect to their own deportation orders in a year where net immigration was about 90,000 or so. Which is a pretty small quotient of people then to be labelling as responsible for acute shortages of housing.
Yes, and then there's, but I mean, I suppose there's the other figure which he'd probably point to is the amount of people who are coming here seeking international protection, like leave it or remove the decision making over you're being told not to. People who are coming here now. Another important context, and it's before we get into the meat of this debate, which is a debate, and it is a debate that is happening, and it was a debate which was raised in the Dáil again today. So for Simon Harris to say there's no debate happening here is nonsense. The number of people, the net migration number for Ireland for this year, 2025, is going to be likely down on 2024.
Okay.
The number of people seeking international protection here in 2025 is also likely to be significantly down on 2024. So why has he not brought that context to the table? Why is he only saying now in 2025, when the numbers are down, as in coming down, why is he only saying now that this is too high and this is too much pressure? I think it's important context to make in this, and a time when this is a very, very sensitive matter.
Well, I think it's interesting because we only talked about those comments last week on the podcast, and we were talking about them in the context of, there being a portion of voters that don't feel represented. We were talking about it in the spoil votes discussion at the time. And you made that point, Richard, that, when we look at politicians and how they're appealing to potential voters, that actually those comments from Simon Harris almost sort of were an element of talking out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that. I mean, look, he said that the system isn't built to deal with all of this.
Who's responsible for building the system?
Yeah.
Who's responsible for the system? And it is very interesting that the pressure he has repeatedly mentioned since he's defended those comments now time and time again since he first made them last week. He keeps on saying, like, the ESRI points to, and rightly so, this is a justified statement to make, that for every 10,000 people who arrive into the country, the estimate is you need 3,000 more homes. Okay. Right? So he's trying to say the pressure on housing is coming from immigration.
Well, but sorry, and again, just to reiterate kind of a point that you're making the whole way through is there wouldn't actually be this level of resentment or rhetoric against people that are coming into the country if the country was operating and functioning in a way that its own citizens actually felt that when they go to work, they could have a transaction, have a life and have a home.
Yeah.
So actually, like, I think we need to recognise that the frustration around immigration is compounded by the fact that actually this government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who've been running the country for a very long time, haven't gotten a grip on that situation, Gavin.
But that in turn then is scapegoating asylum seekers for a problem which, by his own admission, is largely created by Irish people returning home. Because if you're talking about net immigration to the state being in the region of 90,000, well, only a fraction of those, about 20% of those, are people that are applying for international protection in the first place. The vast majority of people coming with work permits, but also a significant number of those that are coming back to the country are Irish citizens who spent time living away and are coming back. And to suggest that they are equally somehow culpable for the housing shortage, it's just sort of nonsensical. And it's kind of real chicken and egg scenario. There's been two. Sorry, go on. Do you want to make?
Yeah, because the housing issue is something like, for Simon Harris, who has been in government now, or Fine Gael have been in government now for 14 years, he has been at cabinet or has been a junior minister. He's been a cabinet for almost 10 years.
9.5 years.
He has been a junior minister for longer than that. I mean, there is an element of a real sleight of hand being done if he is going to be pointing to housing pressures. If the man who has been the second command of government is pointing to the housing pressures that everybody's feeling in this country, and he's saying that, look, if we hadn't as much immigration, we wouldn't have this problem. Are we to be mad at the immigrants for the government missing housing target after housing target and running the general election with misleading housing figures? Are we to be mad at immigrants because Dublin City Council is the biggest hoarder of derelict sites in the capital? Are we to be mad at the immigrants because of the continued failures that I've seen this week? The Department of Finance say that we are going to have a housing crisis until 2040. The lack of collection of derelict sites levy is something which multiple councils we have seen across our country have failed to do. Are we mad at the planning issues, which we've talked about in this podcast before? The lack of investment in water and power, public transport, that means we have an infrastructural deficit of the likes which are far beneath our status as a rich country. This isn't the fault of immigrants. This is the fault of a long-standing housing crisis. We've actually seen people leave this country. It's just a really, really, really poor idea to try and say, look, we're the lads who have been responsible for housing for donkey's years now at this point. We're going to have a housing crisis now until 2040. But the real people you need to be concerned about in terms of the housing supply and the housing pressure are immigrants.
Well, which is why then it's like simultaneously you're responsible for overseeing the extent of the housing problem as it currently is, but you're also responsible, as you said earlier, for the immigration system, which is now earmarking as being problematic in some degree as well.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that the whole way through, in terms of how it was all being handled, like giving Roderick O'Gorman, for example, the responsibility when he had about 101 jobs on his plate over the last couple of years, was that has to have compounded the situation, that like it wasn't dealt with when the initial sort of surge of people coming to the country was happening. The person responsible for it had a lot on their plate as it was.
That's true, but I think Roderick O'Gorman, in fairness, of his own volition, asked for that portfolio in 2020 because it was before the surge of IP applicants and Ukrainians coming in 2022. And he thought that if he took over that brief, he could end direct provision, because that was a major talking point in that general election. So he did ask for it. But there's certainly an argument that midway along the way, when he was given so many other things, that there was an argument for spinning it back off again. On that point about this being a managerial crisis more than a political one, this is a point that was raised a lot during the week by politicians in the Dáil chamber who were effectively accusing the Tánaiste of punching down on immigrants. Here's what they had to say.
People, of course, must be able to debate migration policy, but let's do so in a fact-based manner. Let's use careful and responsible language. And I certainly don't think that the Tánaiste's conflation of all migration with a tiny number of people who are facing deportation orders, I don't believe that was responsible.
This is straight out of the Farage playbook, and it's deeply concerning the government is taking this approach. The reality is the numbers seeking international protection are way down this year.
We need to be debating it, and there is a direct line between the dog whistling of government leaders, the scapegoating of asylum seekers based on misinformation, a direct line between that and the creation of a hostile environment.
Nobody has any issue with debate once debate is done in an evidence-based way with information that stands up. Last week what the Tánaiste did was make some extraordinary comments. He left them hanging there, and quite simply, as far as I'm concerned, they appear to be the kinds of comments that you'll hear from a misinformed bloke in the pub who gets his information from Facebook.
That final comment from Jed Nash being about the statistic that was put out by the Tánaiste and others in government, that there's about an 80% rejection rate for people applying for international protection. Last year's figure was 70% for the most recent month that we have this year, September. In fact, the rejection rate was 56%. So it was almost half of
sorry, just on the point as well, because Simon Harris again made the reference to the 80% number in the Dáil today. And the qualification he's put onto it is now is in the first instance are rejected. Right, about 30% of those rejections end up appealed, and those appeals are granted appeals. Yeah. It's like saying, if it wasn't for all the disallowed goals, we would have won the championship last year. Like, you don't count the initial rejection figure. You count the actual amount of appeals.
Actually, and there's a question about how robust or workable the system is in first instance. If so many people are successful at further appeals, that why didn't they get their?
Why were they rejected
in
the first instance? Yeah. But look, there are massive issues in terms of the management of the international protection system, a system which, according to HICRA reports, is also unsafe in many situations. There are poor conditions in some of them in terms of this non-compliance with some sort of like healthcare issues, in terms of safety issues. But overall, issues around the rejection of international appeal orders, deportations, that is something which the government has tried for many months now to try and look tougher on. Yeah. So you have those instances of, as we saw earlier on this week, you have deportation flights. Then you had the kite flying exercise that came out of the Cabinet Subcommittee about, will we charge people who are in international protection who have jobs rent for the use of international protection? That was shot down almost instantly. It was almost shot down. The fact they say that they're going to pursue this, but the Attorney General says, not sure exactly how this is going to be workable. We can't really evict people if they don't pay, and also implementing that scheme will be very, very expensive. The return on it is not very good. So you actually are flying kites now at a time when this is really, really sensitive. It is actually a matter of life and death. We have seen attempts made to get access into international protection centres and to firebomb places which have been earmarked for international protection. This is a very, very dangerous time to be flying kites. Like, there are issues, and I think everybody accepts that where there are rules and people don't adhere to the rules, or people who are rejected, they should be told to leave the country, and they should leave the country through that mechanism. Just everybody just cool it down a little bit, because I think it is very, very a very, very incendiary issue. And of course, final point in this: how long are we waiting for the government's fact-based campaign to drive down misinformation around the migration issue? They've been promising it for as long as I can remember, and it's never really materialised, bar if you go onto the government.ie webpage. And who does that?
Well, one person that did go to the government.ie webpage at the weekend was me, and that's where I found those statistics for September, which did find, by the way, in first instance, not after appeals or whatever, but that 54% of applications for international protection that were considered in September were approved at first instance. So the rejection rate is not the 70 or 80% that has been made out to be. That PDF, by the way, deleted from gov.ie as soon as this debate kicked off. I don't want to allege conspiracy, but you can't find it there now.